Hey there, good morning, friends. It's morning for me, may not be for you, but thank you for joining me in another episode of the teaching series. And we are in a series right now on Psalm 23, and this is part 3. So the Lord is my savvy shepherd. He understands the environment. He is strong, he is savvy, he understands the landscape, and as a result of that, I shall not want, or I will lack nothing, because this shepherd knows how to provide for my needs. He nestles me or settles me down in green pastures. And we talked about that in the last episode, about how there are pockets of time where we have what we need and we feel like totally content in the abundance that we have. And at other times we have just enough. But that is always the promise, is that God will give us just enough. The Good Shepherd will provide for our needs. And then the next part is what we get to talk about in this episode. He leads me beside still waters. Now, the last episode, green pastures, food, and now we're talking about still waters, which is drink. These two go together. This is why David groups them together. But I felt like we needed to take an entire episode to talk about green pastures, and I feel that we need to take an entire episode talking about still waters. Now, if you'll recall, we're talking about Psalm 23 on two different levels. The first is, what is the shepherding context? And then the second part of that, and how is this a metaphor for our lives? How does this apply to my life and to your life? And so when you talk about a shepherd leading their flock to still waters, what exactly was David getting at? Well, if we've talked about green pastures, which is food, right, we also need daily sustenance when it comes to water. In fact, the water is more important than the food. And so a shepherd knows they must construct their entire day around providing the flock with water. Now, when a shepherd leads their flock out early in the morning, there is a bit of dew that is on the grass or the straw, depending upon the time of year. Remember, green pastures are only 3 months out of the year. The other 9 months, it's like this hay straw. But there's a little bit of dew, and that provides the sheep with a little bit of water to start their day. But generally, like that moment or that time period where the sheep get the water that they need normally happens about midday. So over the course of an entire day, a shepherd and their flock will cover about 5 square miles so that the sheep can get and the goats can get just enough by way of food, particularly during those 9 months out of the year where the grass isn't green and lush and just highly concentrated. They have to go around in order to provide the sheep with what they need and the goats just enough to keep moving. And so when it comes to the water, sometime around the middle of the day, the shepherd will lead the flock to water. Now, David says still waters, and this is very intentional because goats are a much more kind of rugged and hardy animal. The sheep, not so much, and they're very, very skittish. And so when it comes to water, if the water isn't like really calm or really still, the sheep won't drink. So we're in a neighborhood right next to my neighborhood, and I run by here all of the time, and it's the only place around where there is water. So just behind me here is just this little pond, and you can see in the camera that there is a fountain that is going. That fountain right there would scare sheep. That moving water that the fountain creates would scare sheep enough that they won't even touch the water. If they are dying of thirst, they will not drink water that is moving. And so a shepherd has to know Where can I go to take my flock so that the sheep in my flock will actually drink water? And it's got to be completely still. So if you'll recall from our first episode, we talked about how savvy a shepherd has to be to negotiate, or maybe not necessarily negotiate, but to traverse the landscape and to understand like where water is, and particularly where flash floods can happen, because this is the number one killer in the desert. So they have to be able to know, okay, I need to take my flock to this area where there is water, and that there's no harm of a flash flood that could potentially take them out. And again, they're only dealing with a short period of time during the year where flash floods would be a problem where they're at, but flash floods can also originate elsewhere. So they kind of always have to be aware of that. But what they're looking for are these places of water where they can take their sheep, where they know that they will be able to drink. And so they're looking for collections of water, like pools of water that are in a place where the sheep will not be harmed in any way. The shepherd will go, okay, well, if I don't have like a really great watering hole, but there is a stream, then the shepherd will oftentimes cut like a channel out from the stream and make kind of like a dead end channel so that the water will sit, so that the sheep will come and drink. Or if the shepherd is dealing with some kind of a cistern or a well, is that they'll draw the water out, but they'll have to have some kind of like a trough where the water isn't moving. If there isn't a trough, they have to construct that, or they have to like dig a shallow hole in the ground, like a big enough hole to pour the water in so it sets, so that the sheep come. I mean, they are that skittish. But the shepherd wants to make sure that he provides, or she provides, their flock with the still waters for them to be able to drink, because once they've been able to eat and once they've been able to drink, the sheep can rest. And the shepherd knows that when we're covering 5 square miles out of the day, we need these moments where the sheep and the goats can just rest, because the flock isn't always moving. And so that's like the context for what is going on in Psalm 23. And now I want to shift this into our own daily life. What does this mean for us? What does this look like for us? Well, if a shepherd knows that the day has to be oriented around water, what does that look like in our lives? And here's where the literal Hebrew is fantastic, because the Hebrew literally states that he leads me beside waters of rest. That's the literal Hebrew there. And so it's like this, looking at this in our own lives and going, okay, where are those pockets? Like if for the flock, everything is revolving around the water, that what does our lives look like orienting around rest? Like we have to have these pockets of rest, of tranquility that enables us to just be grounded in the midst of all the busyness that is happening around us. And as we wake up every day, what does it look like to have these anchoring points, or a major anchoring point where we go, I need some peace. I need some tranquility. I need some calm in the midst of my day. Because friends, we all know how often things happen throughout the day that are unexpected. Maybe it literally starts raining on you, in the midst of it. And you just go, okay, things pick up and things are busy. And if we don't have like these anchoring moments, it's like we just get tossed in the turbulence of the day, and we never find that soul rest, that calm, that tranquility that we need, that grounds us. Because we're not always supposed to be moving. We're not always supposed to be doing. There are these moments, these pockets, where we just need to rest and to take a deep breath. For me, that is a morning time where I just wake up and go, okay, God, how How can I just kind of orient my day around just a sense of tranquility and calm and peace before the rest of the day gets crazy? For me, parts of those kind of like finding water in the midst of my day are a run for me when I take a run. And I run through this neighborhood and I just see this water and I run around this fountain, and there's just some calm and tranquility in the midst of getting out a little bit of extra energy. And so I just want to ask you, just what does that look like for you? Like, what does it look like for you to go, I need these moments, I need these pockets where God can do something in me? Like it says, He leads me beside still waters. He leads me around waters of rest. It's like, what does it look like to create this space and invite God to do something in the midst of that just puts our soul at rest, allows us to have these moments of tranquility throughout the day, or pockets in the day, you know, whether it's in the morning, maybe for some of us it's a lunchtime, maybe for us it's like the last part of the day. We just open up ourselves and say, God, would you allow me just to experience some rest? You know, maybe for some of us we go, boy, it'd sure be nice to start my day that way, but you wake up and you're just tired in the morning. Maybe the question becomes, what's your rhythm like the night before? Like, do you really need to watch one more in that Netflix series, or to watch just a little bit more of that thing? And you start to think, okay, well, how can I go to bed maybe just a little bit earlier so I can wake up on time? Or you actually get up like 15 minutes earlier and you just go, what does it look like for me just to sit and just to ground my day? You know, if this is resonating with you in any way, one of the earlier teaching series we did was Build Your Central Park, and maybe some of you are thinking about that. And I just feel like this is so important just to come back to it, and Psalm 23 lends itself to us for that, is just to think through what it means that in the midst of allowing God to lead me throughout life, to be reminded of the absolute necessity for peace, for tranquility, for calm places in our lives where we can just sit and be. Because I believe that this is one of the things that David is talking about when he says, as a sheep in God's flock, He leads me beside still waters. And there I take in, I consume, I drink heavily, and it gives me much needed rest in the midst of my day. So friends, thanks for joining me here in the neighborhood next to my neighborhood around this pond that would scare sheep like crazy. But for us, just the idea of moving water is always kind of a picture and a sound of just rest. Even just a light rain, which is just so refreshing and so calming in the midst of what's for me about to be a really busy day. I needed this morning, and I believe we all need it in the midst of our days as well. So thanks again for joining me. If you have questions that you want to ask, again, I'd love to do a teaching at the very end of the series. I'm answering various questions you have about the series. So please feel free to leave that at walkingthetext.com. And if you just know someone needs to hear this teaching today, please share that with them. And friends, may you walk out the text well in your life.